inspiring people with curious minds, harnessing data and technology, working seamlessly and inclusively, always learning from patients. AstraZeneca R&D, helping unlock the power of what science can do.
AT&T is helping business move forward, and together, we've changed the way things get done. From redefining collaboration to coming up with new ways to serve customers and deliver products.
This one is cheddar. It's delicious.
So as your business keeps moving forward,
Oh, you look so healthy.
you can rely on the people and the network of AT&T to help keep your business connected. Let's take care of business. AT&T.
Thank you for joining us. Our program continues now.
Hello, I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you for joining us. I also want to thank the Maryland Tech Council for having us all and inviting me to join you today. My name is Laura Toraldo. I am the Executive Director of the MD 5G Partnership, or the Maryland 5G Partnership. We launched the partnership in the summer of 2020 and have grown to over 30 organizations statewide across industry sectors, including the Maryland Tech Council, who have come together to support expanding connectivity throughout Maryland. Our collective organizations work together through MD5G to advocate and educate for a better connected state. And to dive right into our session topic today, there's nothing like 2 years of being in a pandemic to emphasize our increasing reliance on connectivity. It's made remote learning, working, applying to jobs, gaining access to healthcare and government services, or attending virtual events a necessity. This has not only highlighted the need for access to the internet, it's also underscored the major disadvantages there are for those without reliable access. It sparked major investments in broadband infrastructure through the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, funding and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and many other grant programs, which we'll dive into much greater detail about with the experts here on our panel today. So I'll take a moment and just turn the attention to them. I'll introduce each of them briefly, and if our panelists could just talk a little bit about their background and their organization, we'll get things rolling. So first, I know you've seen him already, Christopher Carroll with AT&T.
Thank you, appreciate it, Laura, and good to see everybody again. Chris Carroll, Regional Director of External and Legislative Affairs with AT&T. So obviously we provide a large variety of services throughout the state, primarily our wireless service, as well as supporting the first responder community with the FirstNet network. So I look forward to having a broad and honest discussion today about things we can do to continue to make progress in Maryland.
Thanks, Chris. Tiffany Harvey with Comcast, welcome.
Thank you, Laura. Tiffany Harvey with Comcast. I am the Vice President for Government and Regulatory Affairs in Maryland and Delaware. In Comcast's brand, we are delivering broadband service to Maryland, and looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Tiffany. Karmen Rajamani with Crown Castle.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carmen Rajamani with Crown Castle. I'm our VP of Government Affairs. And Crown Castle is a broadband infrastructure company. We have over 70,000 small cells that are built or under construction, 40,000 towers all over the country, many of them in rural markets, and over 80,000 route miles of fiber nationwide. So we help build the infrastructure that lets our connectivity work. Thanks.
Thanks, Carmen. And last but not least, Kenrick, or Rick Gordon, who is the Director of the Office of Statewide Broadband for Maryland, and who's going to kick things off for our panel with a presentation about the state's plan to expand broadband access and some of the state and federal funds available to build out the infrastructure. Rick?
Thank you, Laura. So the Office of Statewide Broadband, we're part of the Department of Housing and Community Development for Maryland. We are a funding agency. We provide funding for broadband infrastructure, as well as funding for inclusion and equity programs. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our programs. So the office had been the Governor's Office of Rural Broadband. Last legislative session in fiscal 2021, the House and Senate passed a bill where it created it was called the Digital Connectivity Act of 2021. And this made major changes to our office and our function. As the Office of Statewide Broadband, we have the responsibility for broadband access, equity, and inclusion. We've reorganized the office to reflect these new responsibilities, and we now have a group dedicated to infrastructure and a second program area focused on equity and inclusion. We've also started to work on a broadband plan and the data work required by the law, plan and mapping, which is also going to help us with the upcoming BEAD program in the infrastructure bill. So most of our funding currently is from ARPA funds. When they were announced, the General Assembly was still in session, and the governor presented a supplemental budget with significant increases to the broadband budget. These new funds were split between access and inclusion programs, with about $166 million for access and $134 million for inclusion. Then in August, the governor announced an additional $100 million for broadband expansion. There are also additional funds in the recently passed federal infrastructure bill. Each state is guaranteed a minimum of $100 million, and additional funding is then provided based on the number of unserved households in the state. There's a formula written into the bill that does it as a ratio of unserved in the state versus unserved in the nation as a whole. So the final amount will be determined by new maps that the FCC is developing. We likely won't know the final amount until sometime next year. We have programs that we've been using for the last few years that we've updated to reflect the funding levels in the rules that came with those funds. So the expansion of existing broadband networks has been renamed, which that was the original name, to the Neighborhood Connect Grant Program. I prefer this name. I think it's much more focused on what the program is for. This program is used to provide funding to extend existing service into neighborhoods or pockets of unserved homes. These are generally smaller projects where an existing provider extends a line a mile or two to reach maybe a pocket of 30 homes. The local jurisdictions are the fiscal agent, and as such, they have a say into where the funding will go, providing them with some leverage. The program has become very popular, with over 60 applications being received in 2021. And this year, we received 62 applications, I believe. The program just closed in mid-December, receiving applications, and we're in the midst of reviewing those. For fiscal 22, we adjusted the match. This is a grant program. There is a match required, but the new match is based on the density of the project service area. So a 10% match is required for areas with fewer than 8 homes per route mile, 20% for 8 to 14 homes, and 30% for 15 or more homes per route mile. We've also increased the maximum grant amount to $500,000. It had been $200,000. The applications that we received were approximately $17.8 million, and that's for $24.9 million in total construction costs, and we have about $13 million available for the program. Then we have our Network Infrastructure Grant Program. This is for large areas of unserved homes that require an entirely new network to be built. For this program, the internet service provider is the applicant, and we require much more detailed information since the program provides grants of $1 to $10 million. We really want to know about the company that's applying, and we want to know that the project is going to be sustainable. We require a 5-year pro forma, for instance, along with 2 years of historic financial data, detailed construction budget, detailed schedule. We've used the same match requirement that are in the Neighborhood Connect program, the 10, 20, and 30% based on density. And the maximum grant amount, as I mentioned, is $10 million. Program has $97.6 million available. We just received applications, or the application window closed last Friday. We got $258 million worth of applications for over $300 million in construction. So people listened. The Maryland Emergency Broadband Benefit, this is one of our equity programs. The program is meant to assist low and moderate income households to better afford their internet service. The program provides up to $15 a month in subsidy for service. It works alongside had been the federal EBB program, now the federal ACP program that provides, the ACP program will provide a $30 subsidy. A household must enroll in the federal program and then is automatically enrolled in the Maryland program by the service providers. The ISP provides the service subsidy as part of the household bill, and we provide the funds directly to the provider. There are currently 23 ISPs participating in the program, and we provided about $12 million, or we've encumbered a government term of, we set aside $12 million for the subsidy program for this fiscal year. There's about 31,000 households enrolled, and they will receive subsidy for 12 months ending the end of September. We likely will roll this program into another year since we have additional funds available for it. And we are also going to be working to get more people enrolled in the program. We're working on several other programs, support for nonprofits working on digital inclusion efforts, gap networks that provide free or very low cost internet access to very low income households, a device subsidy program to ensure that households will have a suitable device to access the internet. And each of these programs will roll out over the next few months. So in fiscal 21, we started with a budget of just over $10 million. The governor increased that to $30 million using, again, ARPA funds. We had applications in hand for the programs for a total of $28 million in eligible projects, and due to the increased funding, we were able to award all of them last year. We awarded $5.4 million for 43 expansion projects in 14 jurisdictions. And we awarded $21 million in infrastructure grants for projects in 9 jurisdictions, plus over $2 million was provided to the Maryland Broadband Co-op to extend middle mile service to ensure that our new networks had proper transport and backhaul capabilities. So this is the progress that we've been making with our awards. The red areas are the FCC unserved areas. We certainly recognize that that those areas are questionable, but they certainly do show the jurisdictional difficulties across Maryland. The green is the network infrastructure, the larger grant funds, and then the purple is the what would have been the Neighborhood Connect funds. And this is the map from the past 3 years, so it's cumulative data. And based on the cumulative funding if you break it down by local jurisdictions, over $42 million in grants. We've gotten $62 million in match and other funds, and enabled over $104 million in broadband projects to date. Almost every county has been impacted by our programs. And thank you very much for the time and attention. And Laura, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Rick. It sounds like there's a lot of positive momentum and possibilities, but also still a lot of work to be done. So what are some of the ways that interested applicants can stay informed about the programs and the application window?
So we do have a website. Our programs are up there. Anytime that we have a new opening, we of course list it on our website. You can find it by just doing a simple Google search for Maryland broadband, and I think it comes up as one of the first hits on that listing. We also communicate directly with the local jurisdictions. Anytime we have a program opening, we send out a blast to them to make sure that they're aware. We do press releases. We also work very closely with the Maryland Broadband Cooperative. They will post our projects, and many times they will host application sessions to make sure that their members are aware of it. And what we found is virtually every internet service provider in the state is also a member of the Broadband Cooperative. So we find that to be a pretty good way to get the word out.
Great. While we move into talking with our panelists, I just want to start the conversation by bringing everyone up to speed on the 5G discussion. And the Maryland Tech Council, among many of our MD 5G partners, are focused on expanding 5G coverage to unlock new innovation, create jobs, give a boost to our economy. Can some of the panelists speak to, what that looks like for Maryland and some of the ways that 5G will give our region a competitive edge?
Perhaps at the beginning, we're all feeling a little shy. Let's see. Well, here at Crown Castle, that we are, as I mentioned, a broadband infrastructure company, that we have a number of 5G deployments throughout the state with our small cell deployments in communities all over, and they're active now that they're under construction. And then we have legacy small cells and of course towers with 5G equipment deployed for our customers like AT&T, that we're working with a number of municipalities all over Maryland on deploying fiber that also supports those expansion of those existing 5G networks into underserved communities, as well as installing additional small cells. So we're continuing to expand and really efficiently utilize the infrastructure that we have already deployed.
And I'll jump in, Karmen, and add that we're looking to do the same thing throughout the state of Maryland. So we've deployed 5G in many places across the state, and there are variations on that from kind of the low band 5G to the millimeter wave or the small cells where you get those really impressive speeds depending on where you are. But in terms of what things look like in the future, it's still the great unknown. I mean, there's so much potential out there for folks that are participating in this event. I'm sure you can maybe remember back to when you had your flip phone, or maybe you got your first smartphone, and the networks were transitioning from 2G to 3G, and then from 3G to 4G. And who could have imagined you would have been able to, stand out on a corner somewhere, grab an Uber, catch your ride, and go somewhere else, and be done with it and be at your next event so quickly. So it's still developing, but I think we're seeing tremendous progress in telemedicine and healthcare. I think we're seeing a lot of progress in the public safety sector with real-time video, people being able to see what's going on the ground in real time, law enforcement, first responders. And then you're seeing all kinds of interesting applications with augmented reality, virtual reality, manufacturing. How are we going to monitor logistics? How are we going to monitor inventory in a warehouse? You have all these interconnected devices that are talking to each other, and you need the network to be able to support that level of communication. So I think it's critical for Maryland to understand that you've got to clear as many pathways as possible so that the telecommunications providers, the Comcast, the AT&Ts, the Crown Castles of the world can build the infrastructure so that whatever the future holds, whatever the next great thing is going to be, that we're already ready, things are up and running on the ground, and Maryland can be at the forefront of what those innovations are going to be. We've got to be able to allow the creators to create.
I think if I could just jump in and piggyback a little bit on what Chris talked about, I think he made some excellent points. And one of the things that I think we should be really hyper-focused on in Maryland is building technology neutral solutions, because we're solving right now for today's problems. But as Chris pointed out, I think one of the things we want to do is build an infrastructure that will support where technology is taking us. tomorrow. We know that the future of technology is always constantly shifting. And as we find solutions, whether they're based on public policy or whatever it is that we're dealing with, we want to make sure that we're building for tomorrow as we lay that infrastructure and that groundwork now.
That's great. Thank you so much. So broadband deployment to increase connectivity and upgrade to 5G has been a priority across the country over the past few years. And so this question goes out to our industry experts again, through your work building out these networks, what are some of the best practices that you've seen from a state and local government level that can help to facilitate deployment and serve as a model for Maryland moving forward?
I think one of the first things I'll say is kind of making sure that we're moving into technology neutral. I just want to repeat that again, because I do think that that's a best practice in this space. The second thing that I think is a best practice is ensuring that there's an opportunity for the community to kind of weigh in as to where and what the providers or the carriers are doing and in this space is broadband as we kind of move forward in the broadband conversation. So I think as long as we kind of keep the community needs at the forefront and keep that in mind, that we're building a service and bringing a service to folks and making sure that we're responsive to community needs, I think that's important.
No, I'd agree with that as well. And it's important that we keep a streamlined process. We know government can, be deliberate and take its time, understand, kind of the ramifications of everything that it wants to do. But you also have to understand that it's a competitive marketplace, that there are areas that our companies are going to be looking to make investments. And wherever there is the, I guess, least resistance, if you will, or the greatest opportunity to deploy that capital, that's where the money is going to go. So it's really important for Maryland, all of Maryland's jurisdictions, to understand that you have to have a streamlined process. You have to understand exactly what it's going to take to get from planning to the tower up and running, or in somebody else's case, maybe the fiber in the ground, and make sure that it's clear, it's concise, that hopefully you can replicate what's been done in neighboring jurisdictions. So there's not that much variation between what's happening in Montgomery County versus Prince George's County versus, Dorchester or Allegheny. So making sure that we're really simplifying the process so that everybody understands what's going on. I'm sure Rick's office has a role in helping to, facilitate best practices, across the state. So we appreciate that as well. But again, just making sure that it's a streamlined, easy to understand process so that when our companies are ready to deploy capital, Maryland's at the top of the list because it's easy to do business here.
Yes, I agree with Tiffany and Chris's comments. I'd also just like to add that, looking forward and touching on some of the comments from Rick in his presentation, that with all of the literal, millions, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that are coming from the federal infrastructure packages, that communities have to develop these programs to deploy that money in a way that services the communities, but also helps build the infrastructure so that we can have the technologies available for tomorrow that we don't envision today. And as communities have to deploy the funds, the thought is, if you have to deploy them and you're creating the rules, that they're streamlined, and that those streamlined rules, as Chris touched on, apply to all of our users, whether they're private or public companies utilizing, helping to deploy those funds and bring these projects to bear.
Thanks, Karmen. So this next question is two-part. One, what are some of the ways that the new federal funding can be utilized most efficiently? And two, what are some of the things that officials should prioritize as they begin to increase investment in broadband infrastructure?
So I'll throw in, it's been my office's policy that we encourage the private investment and the private expansion. For the most part, all of our projects have been with private ISPs, even when the local government is the fiscal agent in the pass-through. We really think that that's the most efficient way to do this. The private companies are the ones that understand this business, and they understand how to provide the customer services necessary for a long-term sustainable project. So I think that that this manner of funding has been working and has been working successfully in Maryland, and I think that's the best way to go. And the new federal funds will probably continue down that path.
I think the other thing that I'd add to Rick's comments is that the infrastructure bill was really smart in ensuring that broadband deployment dollars would be spent in unserved and underserved communities. I think that we need to be focused on ensuring that unconnected communities are connected as we move forward and see more pots of money become available. I think the other thing I would say officials should be kind of at least aware of on some level is kind of the process that Chris mentioned before. And I think that goes to how quickly and streamlined the process is, right? Like making sure that pole owners are moving and responding very quickly so that Rick's projects could be pushed through to completion and we can get those speed to market done faster. The permitting process, and as folks on this call definitely know, can slow down a build tremendously. And just making sure that there is efficiency kind of baked into the process and officials are understanding that once they greenlight a project, there's a lot of pieces and a lot of players that then come to the table that can slow those projects down. So keeping that in mind, I think is important in ensuring that folks are prioritizing the work and the spirit of the work and not just their potential interests of their company. I think the other thing that we need to be thinking about is, and I think Rick at least mentioned the state is thinking about this and extending the benefits through another calendar year, is kind of finding a way to establish a permanent subsidy program so that the folks who are getting online and taking advantage of either ACP or Maryland's EBB program, that those people can continue to be a part and stay connected, and finding a long-term permanent funding subsidy, I think is really important and something we should be focused on.
Oh, that's great. I agree with that as well. And then I would just encourage policymakers to not to, I guess, avoid the desire to create something that may be more burdensome than what the federal legislation is already going to lay out. So making sure that we keep the process flexible and we keep it streamlined so that, again, the companies involved in deploying this infrastructure, understand that the rules are the same, in Maryland, it's pretty much the same in Virginia, it's pretty much the same in Washington, D.C. So that there's some certainty there and, we can quickly deploy, the investment.
Yes, that some of the one other best practice is, again, streamlining the rules and learning from projects that have been successful and allowing the permitting process to have flexibility that as there are, for example, construction innovations that make it faster, cheaper, less community disruption to installing fiber or just installing some of these, aerial fiber on poles, that the codes allow for that there is that breathing room and that it doesn't require necessarily code change, that you would be able, the process is flexible enough and the permitting process is flexible enough that you would be able to just weave that in and be able to utilize those innovations right away.
Karmen, just to follow up on that, can you dive into what some of those cost-effective ways there are to expedite construction?
Sure. That one thing that comes to mind right away is micro trenching. So when you're installing traditional fiber underground, you may have to dig a trench that might be, 4 feet across or 4 feet down, something like that, so that you're meeting with code requirements, but there are some obstructions that you would avoid. With micro trenching, it is maybe 2-4 inches across, and into the ground the depth is between 12 to 18 inches. And so you can imagine with the equipment with this, it's like a very slow street cleaner is what it looks like. So you're not closing down 2 lanes of traffic. Maybe it's just one, so traffic can go around. Noise and dust to the surrounding community is far less, and it's faster. You don't have to dig this long trench and then fill it and then install your fiber and all of that, which takes weeks in some cases if it's very complicated. With micro trenching, you would just continue along and you'd be done certainly in a day for a normal installation. So those sorts of innovations, you'd want the permitting process and the existing code requirements to allow for that, and that it wouldn't be a heavy lift to be able to let those innovations go forward right away for new deployments that are in a community.
That's great. And I know that there are some ways that existing structures can be used to support connectivity needs. Can we speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. So with small cell deployment, where you put a little radio box and a little antenna on top of existing infrastructure so that it blends more easily into the community, but it also is providing very targeted coverage and capacity for a particular, maybe it's a couple of blocks or a residential HOA, for example. And so with that equipment, you're utilizing existing infrastructure, so you don't have to install new poles or that would add to clutter in that community. The typical installation is if I'm able to install that, what we call a small cell, that little antenna and that little radio box on perhaps a traffic signal. Again, something that's existing, that has power, that has location, that is needed for coverage and capacity, and that you could just go ahead and just turn it on, and that you would have fiber that would be easy to connect to that existing pole. And then if, let's say, some communities don't like equipment that's on a pole and is visible, well, it's what's called ground furniture. It's installed on the sidewalk. But let's say that the street is already has some things, maybe a recycling bin, newspaper kiosk, things like that. Well, we could mimic that. So we would utilize one of those jurisdiction approved vendors for, let's say it's Big Belly for a recycling section, and then maybe there was a trash section, and then the mailbox, and then maybe we could use one of those sections to install the equipment to make that small cell work. So you're utilizing all existing infrastructure that's there. It is faster to deploy. And if you're a resident in that neighborhood, you wouldn't even notice it as you're taking your dog for a walk, because you're used to that traffic signal and you're used to that recycling and trash equipment. And you'd be thinking, wow, I have great service.
If I could add to that, I think Karmen made some excellent points and ways that we can kind of bring folks and bring things online much faster and bring outcomes to people's homes faster. The other thing I would suggest is, making sure that government-owned structures such as bridges, highways, they're also made available without a lot of some of the onerous requirements that we see that have been mentioned by my colleagues as they were talking. I think that would be also really helpful as we address kind of what Karmen was mentioning, which is like more the private structures or the utility that we're talking about.
No, that's right. I'd say, I know, Rick, we've talked about this, but I'd encourage local governments, I believe the state's already done this, is take an inventory of what you have, where your buildings are located, where your street lights are, where random things may be located that are government-owned structures, where the AT&Ts of the world, Crown Castle, et cetera, would be able to take advantage of those locations. And again, not have to build a tower that people may find, aesthetically unpleasing or what have you. But again, we can build it. The innovations in the aesthetic space have been incredible. So our folks, our vendors can make, the most incredible looking structures blend right on in with what's already existing in the community. So, take the opportunity. I'd encourage lawmakers to figure out what those assets are. If you don't know, I'd encourage the members of the council to just ask your elected officials, do we know the inventory? What are we doing to make sure that, our respective area is ready for, the next generation of, high speed, broadband connectivity, whatever the technology may be, make sure that you're utilizing things that, are easily within your control.
That's a great point. So moving back to addressing the digital divide, I know that we have talked about it a little bit, and it's such a huge priority to ensure that everybody has equal access. Are there any other steps that can be taken to ensure that no one is left behind in this broadband build-out?
So I think that some of the things here, the digital divide has become much more of a common word now, or phrase now. It leads to everything from lack of access, lack of a signal, lack of a wire at the house, to inability to afford service, to inability to understand why the internet is something that can be helpful. We are working with the University of Maryland Extension. They're creating a digital literacy program, which will help educate and train, if you will, users who just aren't familiar with the internet. I always look at my 89-year-old father who has never been on the internet and still carries a flip phone. Meanwhile, I'm here, my wife is a CIO at a company. So, but that happens in many families. So how do we overcome that? The affordability issue, as Tiffany mentioned, trying to continue subsidy programs to make sure that everyone can afford service. And obviously getting the signal to the house. We're utilizing a lower match requirement to really drive into those areas that ISPs simply can't afford to do the construction on their own, because the return on investment is just not there for their shareholders, and that's understood. So we are trying to figure out ways to overcome all of these issues, but none of them offer simple solutions.
I agree. I think that the permanent subsidy in place, I think, will be huge for families as we kind of navigate the closing of that divide for folks. And I think that is really something that lawmakers on the local and on the state and on the federal level need to be mindful of, and have that kind of as the forefront of how they're thinking about this. I think the second thing that we need to do is make sure that we as a collective need to ensure that folks are aware of the subsidies that are currently available to them. Rick, in his initial comments, mentioned the Maryland Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. And there's 30,000 people. I think, Rick, that was the number that you gave, something about 30,000 people that have enrolled in the program. Many more families are eligible though, and folks don't know. And so I think we have to do a good job. I think lawmakers should be using their platforms. I know that Comcast uses our platform. I know my colleagues are using their platforms to kind of put the message out and put the word out that these funds are available for the express and intent purpose of bringing families into that space of connectivity. So I think that that's really important, that we all need to be pushing information out so that people have the information. And I think the last thing that I would say is that we need to build really important relationships with communities so that folks understand the benefits that are available to them from having a presence online, right? We've talked about telehealth during the course of today's conversation. We've talked about the educational benefits that come from it. Jobs, I mean, we know where the future is going, right? There are studies that are out there. One of my colleagues, Broderick Johnson, had an article, an op-ed piece that was published in the Baltimore Sun on December 14th relating to broadband. And we know where the jobs are going, right? You're going to have to be able to get online. And I think making sure that we are communicating that in barbershops, churches, community organizations, groundbreaks organizations, education, schools. I mean, all of those places, we need to be kind of beating the drum that this is where the world's going. And for you to have a seat at that table, connectivity is part of that. And I think that that kind of builds into what Rick was talking about, some of the other comments, just making sure that folks kind of understand the importance of where we're headed tomorrow, even today.
No, I totally agree with that, Tiffany. And it's important. I think we're all, at least all the providers here, are taking advantage of that program, and their customers are able to sign up if they're eligible. Would encourage people to, as we spread the word, you can go to acpbenefit.org and find out if you're eligible, if you qualify, based on the qualifications laid out in the program. So it's, again, just making sure that people are aware of the opportunity to get a subsidy to help afford that service. The pandemic has shown us, that it's critical to have connectivity. And we've done all kinds of things throughout the pandemic to help in, areas where coverage is not, where we want it to be, or they may not have the coverage down there that they want. And children and parents have had to do some really creative things to get their kids and keep their kids connected for the virtual learning situation. But it's only going to continue. The demand is only going to continue to grow. So again, it's important for policymakers to understand that the demand is going to be there. That's where the puck is headed. That's where the future is in terms of connectivity and high-speed broadband. And what are we doing to help make sure that it's available, that the obstacles are as few as possible, so that we can roll out the technology that's going to help, create the next great innovative city area within the state of Maryland. Who knows what's possible, but we have to make sure that we clear the roadblocks so that, innovation can thrive.
Thanks, Chris. I know that we have just a few minutes left here, and I want to turn to a few of the questions from the audience that have come in. The first one being, what is the generally accepted definition of broadband service?
I'll try to answer this one. So it depends on who you're talking to. The FCC still says 25 meg down by 3 meg up. One thing that we found out during the pandemic, 3 meg up when you have 2 or 3 people trying to do video conferencing at the same time just doesn't work. The newer ARPA rules are setting that limit at 100 meg down by 20 meg up. I think that's much more realistic. And I think the infrastructure bill is pushing 100 meg down by 100 meg up as there. So, we are starting to really recognize that some of the things that home users are doing are becoming very bandwidth intensive. I would say 100 by 20 as the very minimum is what we should be looking at. And I really like 100 by 100. And as an engineer, I really like gig. But I think 100 by 20 for most households is probably going to work for the next several years. And as long as we build scalable projects, then we can always increase that speed.
The next
Yes.
question.
Oh, no, I was just piggybacking on Rick's comments. I mean, I think that we've seen report after report, there's one every year that shows the exponential growth in data usage by the average American, that it's something like 8-fold that's expected in the next few years from what we're doing now. It's incredible. And so that's one thing really there's so many things to keep in mind with all of these infrastructure initiatives, but that it is sustainable and that it's easy to grow, and that it is, as we've talked about earlier, technology agnostic. That 1 in 4 Americans, and they may skew younger, use only their smartphone for internet access. And so, for the topics that Tiffany raised, for jobs, for fun things, but to apply for a job, you do it online. And for lawmakers and, to be aware of how their constituents are using their devices, it is critical to have them, for home service. I've been working through the virtual school myself, but to understand how their constituents are using their devices, and that it has to be wireline and wireless as well.
That's a great point, Karmen, and it kind of leads into this next question. It says, there are competing technologies in the race to provide universal broadband. How can we ensure there's the proper mix of technologies?
Well, I'll just add, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen a tremendous amount of innovation and evolution in just wireless technology over the past decade. I believe that's going to continue. So speeds are going to continue to go up. Coverage will continue to improve. And who knows what will be born out of those those innovations. We as a provider within the state, we run the FirstNet network for first responders. We made a commitment to the state a few years back to expand coverage throughout the state so that those first responders would be able to communicate in some of the more remote parts of the state where coverage was not what we'd hoped it to be. Last year we just had a couple of events in Dorchester County, Allegheny County, announcing new towers with improved coverage down there. And it wasn't just first responders that showed up because they would benefit, but we had people in the community show up talking about how they, that was their only connection, to the internet. That was their best and greatest way to, to connect, to do Zoom calls, to do, FaceTime with their families, what have you. So we recognize that. So I think it's just, I don't know what the mix is going to be, but I definitely believe it will be a mix. And I believe wireless plays a huge role in filling those gaps where you're just not going to get that traditional, wired connection.
The only thing I would add to that is kind of as we find our way to whatever that mix is going to be, is that the critical piece is making sure that we have the ability to get it to homes, right? And so making sure that the permitting processes, that whatever rules or regulatory schemes are put in place, they all can help allow us to get those things to you quickly. We don't want to stifle innovation in Maryland. Based on just where we are located geographically, Maryland has the ability to be a place where people kind of flock to, businesses grow here, families have the ability to engage in whatever the world economy is going to be, whatever the academics are going to be required for tomorrow. I think we want to just make sure that Maryland has the ability to kind of move with that process. And Karmen gave some really good examples about why it's so important to be flexible and have flexible processes in place. But I think that all kind of goes towards what Chris is talking about, which is let's just be ready for whatever is coming down the road as we build our infrastructure with Rick's guidance and help.
Thanks, Tiffany. And it's been a really great discussion. And I think a lot of what I heard today spoke to strong collaboration needed between government, industry, and stakeholders, for successful, expansive broadband deployment. So thank you so much again to the panelists for your expertise and your work supporting our state's growth, and to the Maryland Tech Council for bringing attention to this important and timely subject. And to those of you tuning in, I know we are all looking forward to a more connected Maryland. And now I will pass the virtual mic over to Tech Council CEO, Marty Rosendale. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you for that panel discussion. It was great. I have to admit, the question about what is the definition of broadband came from me. It seems that we all talk about broadband as if we all agree on exactly what it is and what it means, when in fact it seems to be a moving target as we use more and more technology and need more and more bandwidth. But in any event, this is the conclusion of our summit. I want to thank you all for being with us virtually this afternoon. We're looking forward to a great legislative session this year, and I ask you to keep an eye out for our weekly legislative updates. Thank you all.